Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper. Let's begin by looking at the editorial page. This editorial explains the role of forecasting during a pandemic and how it can be used to promote policy changes and behavioral changes and to avoid worst case scenarios. See, ever since the COVID-19 pandemic broke out, we have been hearing about various forecasting models that try to predict the possible number of cases that might emerge in the coming months. Such forecasting of a pandemic is very essential for the policy planners, that is the government, the healthcare industry, and as well as for the society at large, in order to induce policy changes and behavioral changes, and as well as to try and avoid the possible worst case scenarios. So on similar lines, India's Department of Science and Technology had constituted a committee of experts comprising of leading mathematicians, infectious disease experts and epidemiologists. And now this committee has come out with a mathematical modeling to forecast the possible spread of COVID-19 in India in the coming months. This latest forecast is being published in a research journal, and according to it, India has already reached its peak COVID-19 infection rate in the month of September itself. So if this forecasting is accurate, then there would be a steep decline in the number of new cases in the coming months, and the number of active cases, which currently stands at around 7.5 lakh, might drastically decline to just around 50,000 by the end of this year. So this forecasting model has predicted that the pandemic in India might extinguish itself by February 2021, with India witnessing a very minimal rise in new cases from this period. While these predictions paint a very optimistic picture, one should not forget that these predictions have been made based on some very strong assumptions. Because at the end of the day, any mathematical modeling and any forecasting is just an exercise in probability. Such a forecasting is definitely useful for inducing changes and for avoiding worst case scenarios. But however, one should not make the mistake of presuming that they are 100% accurate, because that could lead to a sense of complacency and a sense of fake security, which would end up triggering a second wave of infection in the coming months. Because see, these mathematical data modeling based forecasts do not take into account a number of variable factors. For example, the virus might undergo newer mutations in the coming months. Then the impact of the winter season on the coronavirus is not entirely understood. Our past experience with infectious viruses shows that the winter season directly contributes to a renewed surge in the spread of new infections. Then available studies have already shown that antibodies produced by those who have already been infected may not be durable for a long period. It means that those who have already recovered from COVID-19, they cannot assume that they are immune and they cannot assume that they are safe from future infections, because there are still questions over the durability of these antibodies. And as we have witnessed around the world, there is a possibility of reinfections occurring. Then moreover, the spread of any disease is always dependent on how the society follows the various restrictions, including measures such as the wearing of masks, the use of sanitizers and soap, and more importantly, the strict adherence to social distancing norms. So even if we assume that India has already reached its peak in September, and as the forecasting model has shown that the new cases might come down drastically by Feb, even then, India would still face the risk of a second wave of infection, as is currently being witnessed in Europe, because a newer strain of the virus might emerge. Winter and the festival season that is coming up might have an impact on the spread of the disease. The short-term immunity might make those who have already recovered from COVID-19 susceptible for reinfections, and the lack of adherence to social distancing norms and the failure to follow basic precautions such as the wearing of masks, the usage of sanitizers, etc., could easily trigger a second wave of infection, which might be even more deadlier, because blind faith in forecasting and data modeling might introduce a sense of complacency within the government, within the healthcare industry, and more importantly, within the society. But at the same time, we can't ignore the fact that data modeling based forecasting is very useful for policy planners, and it definitely helps in inducing policy changes, behavioral changes, and in preparing the society for worst case scenarios. So it is in this context that we need to understand the true purpose of pandemic forecasting. See, as we discussed, any such forecasting is based on mathematical modeling, and it is just an exercise in probability. But it provides a probabilistic overview of how the infection rate is going to grow in the coming months and probably when the infection might reach a peak, thus helping the policy planners, the government, the healthcare industry and the society to prepare for all possible worst case scenarios. But however, any such mathematical exercise and probabilistic exercise is directly dependent on the quality of the data and the data sets that they rely upon. So in any case, we should not take this forecasting data literally, and we can't blindly believe that this forecasting data is 100% accurate. Similarly, the political parties and the government should not misuse the forecasting data for their own political reasons. The government should avoid claiming credit for its past decisions by using the forecasting data, and similarly the opposition parties should stop unnecessarily criticizing the government by relying upon the forecasted numbers. The true purpose of any such exercise is to induce a change with regard to government policy and societal behavior, and it helps us design better methods of controlling the pandemic. See, for example, the forecasting model has helped us understand how effective lockdowns can be in containing the further spread of the pandemic. Our experience over the last 8 to 9 months has clearly shown that nationwide lockdowns are pretty much useless, and more importantly, they end up damaging the economy. And hence, governments around the world have come to the realization that localized containment strategies are much more effective as compared to blanket lockdowns imposed across the country. So in conclusion, every stakeholder should remember that pandemic forecasting is an essential policy tool which can help the government, the health authorities and the society. But the forecasted data should never be taken literally, and it should not induce us into a sense of complacency, because that could end up triggering a much larger second wave of infection. In a related article on page number 10, the World Health Organization is making the same argument. It is cautioning India to not enter a phase of complacency just because the new cases have fallen to just around 40,000 from a peak of 97 to 98,000. The WHO has asked India to be cautious about the upcoming festival season and the winter season, because after a few months of consistent decline, India might very well witness a much larger second wave of infection. So in this context, the WHO has advised us to continue following the 3 C's, which is to avoid crowded places, avoid closed settings such as restaurants, pubs, etc., and avoid confined and enclosed spaces with poor ventilation. The upcoming winter season is also going to be very challenging for the healthcare industry, because the symptoms of COVID-19 and the symptoms of regular viral influenza are quite similar. So this might make the detection of new cases all the more difficult, and hence all safety measures including social distancing, hand hygiene, masks, etc. have to be followed if the chain of transmission has to be broken in order to curtail the pandemic. The next editorial talks about the inequities being created by the NEET entrance examination and the need for affirmative action in order to protect the weaker sections. See, NEET stands for National Eligibility Cum Entrance Test, and it is an entrance examination taken up by students who are seeking an entry into undergraduate medical courses and dentist courses. Ever since the NEET examination was introduced, there has been a lot of politics and controversy surrounding it, and especially the examination held this year became highly controversial because of the pandemic and the lockdown. A number of students around the country, several opposition parties and even state governments had opposed the conduct of this year's examination on the account that the pandemic and the lockdown might affect the ability of a number of students to reach the examination centers. But despite the opposition and the controversy, the entrance examination was held, and recently the results have also been announced. So considering the difficult circumstances under which the examination was held, we need to see this as an achievement. See, the primary objective of introducing the NEET examination was to introduce a single unified entrance examination which could help standardize medical education in the country and raise the quality of medical education by eliminating the need for multiple entrance exams, which was placing a lot of stress on the students, and to create a level playing field for students by providing a unified entrance examination in the place of multiple entrance examinations. See, there is no doubt that such a single entrance examination with common syllabus definitely provides for a level playing field for the students and makes the entrance examination more equitable. But however, this examination process has also several drawbacks, and it inherently promotes inequity in education as well. Because see, in India, each state has been allowed to have a different education system of its own with different streams, with each state having its own state board and state syllabus. And this provides for varying education standards in each state with different degrees of pedagogy. So these varying standards of education in each state naturally creates inequities when a common national level examination is being held, such as the NEET. Especially the weaker sections, those who are poor, students from remote areas and tribal areas, and students who have studied only in state boards and in government schools, they in particular would be at a disadvantage while taking up a common examination such as the NEET. See, even though an examination like NEET is needed to standardize medical education and raise the quality of medical education, we need to keep in mind the inherent inequities of such an examination and how it can disrupt the level playing field. So as a way forward, the editorial suggests that state governments in particular, they need to focus on ensuring equitable access and affordability, especially in the field of education and healthcare. So based on these factors, the editorial makes a case for affirmative action, that is reservation, and other welfare measures to be provided by the state governments. Because see, when disadvantaged students who belong to these categories, when they are preparing for such a unified examination with a common syllabus, and when they are trying to compete at a national level, they need some sort of assistance by the state. Take for example how the state of Tamil Nadu has provided for a reservation of 7.5% of the medical seats to those students who have studied in state government schools. So the editorial says that the other states need to follow the example of Tamil Nadu and ensure that affirmative action is taken to protect the students from weaker sections in the form of reservation. Then upon this, the state governments will also have to consider the need for coaching and the impact of coaching in order to bridge the knowledge gap that disadvantaged students might have when it comes to taking up such a national level examination. So if there is a need for promoting private education in order to augment the knowledge and skills of students, then the government needs to ensure that the fees is capped in order to prevent private coaching institutions from charging exorbitant fees. Along with that, the state governments can also announce subsidies for specific students, especially those from weaker sections, in order to ensure that their economic interests are protected. So in short, any welfare state needs to focus on such affirmative action in order to protect students from the weaker sections, in order to ensure equitable access and affordability to education and healthcare. Next, on page number 7, we have a very important column written by Mr. R.K. Raghavan, who was the former director of the CBI. So based on his considerable expertise in the IPS, R.K. Raghavan goes on to state that terror outfits such as Al-Qaeda, Islamic State, Lashkar and Jaish-e-Mohammed, they continue to pose a significant threat to India's national security interests in the neighborhood. See, over the last few months, it appears that the number of terror attacks carried out by these outfits has gone down as a result of the pandemic. There is no doubt that the COVID-19 pandemic has affected the operational capabilities of these terror groups because they are faced with a lack of resources and lack of support, especially by their sponsors such as Pakistan, which were funding and supporting them. But however, the writer cautions that this is most likely a temporary trend and there is no scope for any complacency on India's part because these terror outfits are known to be very, very resilient, and in all likelihood, they are going to stage a resurgence very soon, and they might very well be using the break provided by the pandemic to reorganize themselves by raising fresh resources, and they might be trying to rebuild their organizations in order to carry out much more devastating attacks in the region. See, terror outfits such as Al-Qaeda and ISIS, they are more of global terror outfits with a global ambition. Whereas terror outfits such as the Lashkar and the Jaish, they are more regional centric and they are primarily anti-India terror groups sponsored directly by the Pakistani state. So in that regard, Lashkar and Jaish are more dependent on the state support given by Pakistan, whereas groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS, which have a global reach, they are more self-sustaining, and it has been noticed that the pandemic has not really affected their ability to continue promoting radicalization and recruitment to their organizations. Security experts around the world agree that the pandemic is most likely to increase radicalization in the coming days because it is pushing millions of people around the world into abject poverty. And this creates a fertile ground for terror outfits such as Al-Qaeda and ISIS to further promote radicalization and religious indoctrination, thereby significantly increasing recruitment into their organizations. And since global outfits such as Al-Qaeda and ISIS, largely rely upon social media platforms for recruitment, it has been observed that their recruitment drive has continued undiminished even during the pandemic. So it is only a matter of time that these groups reorganize themselves and start carrying out major attacks in the region, thereby posing a direct threat to India's national security and national interests. It is in this context that the writer evaluates the impact of the Doha Peace Accord on India. See, over the last few months, we have covered the Doha Peace Accord in detail. The Doha Peace Accord is nothing but the peace deal which was signed earlier this year in the month of February between the United States and the Taliban in order to bring the civil war in Afghanistan to an end and stabilize the country. Under this peace deal, the United States has agreed to withdraw all its troops, and in return, the Taliban has promised to maintain peace in the country and ensure that Afghan soil is not misused by any terror outfits. So through this peace deal, the enmity between US and Taliban has been brought down. But however, the US and other Western governments, they are not naive enough to believe that the Taliban is going to uphold its promise. See, right now the priority for the US is to pull back the American troops in order to score a political point back home in the United States, especially during the presidential election season. The US is well aware of the connections that Taliban has with terror outfits such as Al-Qaeda and with the state agencies of countries such as Pakistan. So this nexus between Taliban, Al-Qaeda and the Pakistan poses a significant security threat for the region. But the United States is not really concerned about this threat as long as the Taliban and the Al-Qaeda does not pose a threat to the Western world. So this ends up turning the Afghan situation and the impact of the Doha Peace Accord into a concern just for India and its neighboring countries. Because once the Taliban regroups, it will definitely be able to mobilize greater resources and re-establish its traditional support to terror groups such as Al-Qaeda with the state support of Pakistan. And these outfits definitely do not lack any motivation to target countries such as India, and they even have the required cadre strength to execute such spectacular attacks in the region. Then if you consider how close these organizations are to other anti-India outfits such as Lashkar and Jaish, then the security threat for India becomes compounded. And along with this, we have the emergence of the Islamic State in the Af-Pak region, which is posing a direct threat to Indian interests in the region. Even though the ISIS and Al-Qaeda are ideologically opposed to each other, it is very likely that Pakistan's ISI might try to bridge this ideological gap so that all the radical factions in the Af-Pak region can be brought together to jointly target Indian interests in the South Asian neighborhood. This rising threat is becoming more evident as India's intelligence agencies and counter-terror agencies such as the NIA bust more and more terror modules that are affiliated to organizations such as the Al-Qaeda and the ISIS. Then it is a well-acknowledged fact that Pakistan-sponsored outfits such as Lashkar and Jaish, which are primarily focused on India, they always continue to pose a threat to India, and a collusion between them is going to be a nightmare scenario for the Indian government. This combined threat is very likely because global outfits such as Al-Qaeda and ISIS are losing interest and even capabilities to target the Western world. So more likely, countries such as India would become an ideal target for these outfits, which are very eager to re-establish their presence and influence in the region. So it is in this context that the writer concludes that these terror groups might be dormant for the time being, but they are waiting to strike back. Next, in another column, the writer, who is the UN AIDS Country Director for India, evaluates India's progress with regard to tackling HIV/AIDS infection, especially amongst children and pregnant women. By analyzing the data for the last 9 years, the writer concludes that India has made tremendous progress when it comes to tackling HIV infections amongst children and pregnant women, and it has been very successful in bringing down the mother-to-child transmission of HIV/AIDS. The writer says that the credit for this should go to the National AIDS Control Organization and the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare of India, along with the UN AIDS, which has provided the required technical support to the Indian government agencies. Data of the last 9 years shows that the incidence of HIV/AIDS amongst children has gone down by a massive 66.1%, and overall HIV/AIDS related death count has come down by 65.3%. Then it is also very encouraging to note that HIV incidence amongst pregnant women has also decreased, and along with this, the testing rate and treatment coverage has expanded significantly over the last 1 decade. The National AIDS Control Organization has taken further steps to bring down the incidence of HIV/AIDS amongst children and pregnant women by fast-tracking the EMTCT program. See, EMTCT stands for Elimination of Mother-to-Child Transmission. This initiative of NACO was launched in 2002. Since then, NACO, along with other government organizations and global institutions, it has focused upon putting an end to the mother-to-child transmission of HIV/AIDS, and this initiative has been recently fast-tracked by NACO in 2019 with the objective of achieving significant progress by the end of this year. So to achieve this ambitious objective, NACO and the central agencies have mobilized all the stakeholders, including the state governments, the local institutions, partners such as NGOs, in order to engage in a collective effort to tackle mother-to-child transmission of HIV/AIDS. This remarkable progress of India has been credited to improved education and awareness campaigns that has been run by the Indian government, which has made the government's communication more effective, thereby driving up the testing rate. And along with this, the national healthcare programs focused on AIDS have improved access to treatment. Simultaneously, India has stepped up access to counseling services, follow-up checkups, and it has provided for the full-fledged implementation of the National Treat All policy. This ensures that no infected patient or no vulnerable community is excluded, and this approach has played a key role in driving India's success. Then credit should also be given to the NACO, which has worked closely with global organizations such as the WHO and the UNICEF to identify the high burden districts so that pregnant women with HIV can be identified through the provision of free testing, and based on this, free treatment has also been extended at the grassroots level. So the role of India's grassroots institutions, especially the local healthcare centers, should be really appreciated, because that has augmented and supplemented the data-driven approach that has been taken up at the top levels, that is at the level of the central government, where the decision making has been driven by NACO. Next, in a very interesting development, India has decided to elevate the trilateral Malabar naval exercise into a quadrilateral naval exercise that involves Australia as well. See, we have discussed repeatedly over the last few months that the Malabar naval exercise until now was just a trilateral naval exercise involving India, US and Japan. Earlier, when the Malabar exercise was started in the 1990s, it was just a bilateral exercise between India and US. Back in 2006-2007, India had made an attempt to invite Japan, Australia and even Singapore to join the Malabar exercise. And this move of India had increased tensions with China, and as a result, India had returned the Malabar exercises back to the bilateral format just with the US. But as a result of rising tensions with China post 2010, India decided to re-invite Japan back to Malabar exercises, and from 2015, Malabar exercise has become a trilateral exercise involving India, US and Japan. Of late, Australia had expressed a lot of interest to join the Malabar exercise, and during a recent virtual summit between India and Australia, Australia had requested India to include Australia under the Malabar exercise and thereby turn it into a quadrilateral exercise. Earlier, India was quite hesitant to accept Australia under the Malabar exercise because that would essentially have militarized the Quad grouping. As we know, the Quad or the quadrilateral is an informal diplomatic grouping of India, US, Japan and Australia that is focused on the Indo-Pacific region. The objective of the Quad is to enforce a rules-based order in the Indo-Pacific, especially in the South China Sea, and ensure that freedom of navigation is protected. This is basically an indirect reference to China's aggression in the South China Sea, which has aggravated the maritime disputes with Southeast Asian countries. And China's aggressive military activities in the region has directly threatened freedom of navigation, which is a violation of the rules-based order established under the UN clause or the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. So to counter this Chinese aggression and enforce a rules-based order in the Indo-Pacific region, these four countries had come together under an informal diplomatic grouping known as the Quad. But now that the Malabar exercise has been turned into a quadrilateral naval exercise, it will essentially serve as the military arm of the Quad. And this decision of India comes at a time when its border tensions with China is at an all-time high. This year's edition of the Malabar exercise is supposed to be held next month in November, and just in time, India has accepted Australia's proposal, and the four countries have stated that this joint naval exercise will promote joint cooperation and interoperability amongst their naval forces and strengthen their ties in the maritime security domain. But it is no secret that the inclusion of Australia under the Malabar exercises will turn the Quad into a military grouping, and it would be very interesting to watch how China would react to this development. Now let's take up the practice questions for today. System of Air Quality and Weather Forecasting and Research, or SAFAR, has been brought out by the Ministry of Environment, Forests and Climate Change, Ministry of Earth Sciences, Indian Institute of Tropical Meteorology, or both B and C. The correct answer is option D, both B and C. The SAFAR Air Quality and Weather Forecasting System has been brought out by the Ministry of Earth Sciences in collaboration with the Indian Institute of Tropical Meteorology. This air quality and weather forecasting system finds a mention in an article on page number 4, which deals with the deteriorating air quality of the Delhi NCR region, which has been brought out by the Air Quality Index. As we have discussed over the last few days, to tackle the menace of air pollution in the Delhi NCR region, especially during the winter season, the Supreme Court has constituted the Environment Pollution Prevention and Control Authority, and this EPCA is responsible for implementing a graded response action plan. One of the extreme measures under the graded response action plan is to implement the odd-even scheme, which restricts the movement of vehicles in the Delhi NCR region based on their registration numbers. And the authorities have said that the odd-even option shall be used as a last weapon, as a last resort against air pollution in the region. And on page number 1, there is also an image that depicts the practice of stubble burning in the Punjab-Haryana region, which is said to directly contribute to excessive air pollution in the Delhi NCR region, especially during the winter season. Now let's take up the next question. The Home Rule League in Maharashtra, Central Provinces, Karnataka and Berar region was started by Annie Besant, Gopal Krishna Gokhale, Bal Gangadhar Tilak, Lala Lajpat Rai. The correct answer is option C, Bal Gangadhar Tilak. See, the Home Rule League for demanding self-rule from the British was started by Annie Besant and as well as by Bal Gangadhar Tilak. Tilak's Home Rule League operated in these regions, whereas in the rest of the country, the Home Rule League was run by Annie Besant. This question on Bal Gangadhar Tilak has been asked because the 100 years ago article on page number 7 makes a reference to the contribution of Tilak to India's freedom struggle. Now let's take up the next question. What does the term buyback of PSU shares recently seen in news entail? PSUs would buy back the shares held by the government. Buyback of its own shares by a firm shrinks its equity base and hence enhances the value of each share. Government seeks to meet its disinvestment target in part through buybacks of shares by public sector undertakings. All the three statements are correct. Option D is the right answer. See, as you know, in every public sector unit, the government shall be holding a majority stake. And through the buyback option, the government pushes the PSU to buy back the shares held by the government. And when this is done, the equity base of the PSU will shrink, thereby enhancing the market value of each share. So since the PSU would be buying back the shares from the government, it will have to make a payment for the government, which helps in bringing revenue to the government as a part of its disinvestment target. And recently, this route has been preferred by the government to raise revenue in order to help the government meet its fiscal deficit target. This question has been asked because we have an article on page number 14 that makes a reference to the buyback of shares by PSUs. Now let's take up the next question. Which of the following statements are correct? National Company Law Appellate Tribunal was constituted under the Companies Act of 2013. It hears appeals against the orders of National Company Law Tribunals. It is also the appellate tribunal for hearing appeals against the orders passed by the National Company Law Tribunal and Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board of India under the IBC Code or the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code of 2016. All the three statements are correct. Option D is the right answer. See, the National Company Law Appellate Tribunal acts as an appellate tribunal not just against the orders of the National Company Law Tribunals under the Companies Act, but also against the orders of the NCLT and the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board of India under the IPC Code. Apart from this, the National Company Law Appellate Tribunal also acts as an appellate tribunal against the orders of the Competition Commission of India as well. This question has been asked because we have an article on page number 14 that makes a reference to the National Company Law Appellate Tribunal. Now let's take up a practice question from the 2015 prelims paper. Biocarbon Fund Initiative for Sustainable Forest Landscapes is managed by the World Bank. Option D is the right answer. This financing initiative is primarily used to sponsor environment conservation initiatives in select countries against deforestation and forest degradation. Finally, let's take up a couple of mains practice questions. The first question, pandemic forecasts must be used to induce changes and avoid worst case scenarios? Examine in the Indian context. The second question, as NEET progresses, states must take affirmative action to protect the weaker sections. Discuss. So kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the comment section below. This concludes our discussion for the day. Thanks for watching.